Okay, my friends, as we jump into getting started, I will let you know that this voiceover is going to take quite a while to get done. I may have to start and stop it in different places, so please look over and forgive me if the volume level should change at any point. So, what I wanted to do with you guys today is really just take another close look at using the Giorgione, and I do believe this is the 120 count watercolor pencil set. Now, I originally ordered this set off of Amazon. I have not been able to find it on Amazon lately, but I do believe I've seen it on a couple of other sites, including AliExpress, which I've had pretty good luck ordering from in the past. I wanted to just kind of go through that set, find a couple of different colored pencils, pull them out, combine them with a few different things like maybe some black fine liners. You also saw me looking at a Recollections like water-based blender pen, which is a really good accessory to use along with water-soluble pencils. Those blender pens do not release as much water at one time as say like a water brush will, or maybe using a regular brush with water on it. And they can help, depending on the quality of the watercolor pencil, they can help prevent from like lifting too much of the pigment or moving too much of the pigment. However, in this particular composition, I really didn't have the need for it. So, although I showed it to you when I was originally pulling everything out of that tray, I'm not really going to be using it. Now, as I said earlier, the pencils I'm using are the Giorgione. Now, these are super budget friendly, super economical pencils, but friends, let me tell you, they blend and dissolve in water so well. I have been pretty blown away with using them. Now, I will be getting around to a review of the pencils coming up in the very near future, because I do need to get all of the reviews that I'm going to get done for June out of the way, because I don't want anything blocking my path when we get ready to jump into July and take advantage of all 30 days of World Watercolor Month. I'm so excited. I cannot wait. We will have a video coming up at the beginning of July showing all of the products that I'll be using during World Watercolor Month. And I'm just hoping that we're going to have a good time with it. Sponsored by Doodle Hog. In case you guys don't know what that is, you can always go to the Doodle Wash. And you can always go to the Doodle Wash website and get the monthly prompt list for July, which will be World Watercolor Month. That way you can follow along with what I do. It'll be so much fun. So I decided that I wanted to do another dessert painting. As you can see, I'm working inside the handmade accordion journal that I've shown you guys several different times, that I've been doing many of my dessert paintings in. And to start this off, I simply transferred a sketch of 2 scoop ice cream cone. It's like a waffle cone with some chocolate on it, and then it's got like some little pistachio nuts that are sprinkled on top. So I just got that traced, or should I say transferred. I traced it onto my regular transfer paper and then transferred it into my sketchbook to kind of avoid any sketchy lines. And then I simply went in with my pencils and started to add color. Now, the thing about this pencil set is that there are no color names. There is no numbering system. There is no light fast information. As I said earlier, it's a really super budget friendly set. So, I really wasn't expecting the light fast information, but I really want budget companies to hear me well. Not that you're going to care that I've got it to say, but listen to me. If you are owner of a budget company, and I can promise you guys that when I get to the point where I'm releasing pencils, I will not do this. Please put a numbering system or a color name on the pencil. It cannot be that much more expensive to literally print a name. It just helps for indexing. and quickly finding the color that you were using again. I just think that's something that budget companies should really put a little bit more thought into. So, although I cannot tell you the exact name of the colors that I'm using, I will kind of go out of my way to give you the general artist color names. That way, you can kind of gauge what you may or may not be able to use based on what you do or don't have in your own art supply arsenal. So for the cone, I did a really light layer of a brownie kind of gray. It's somewhere in between, like maybe a burnt umber and a burnt sienna. If I had to just give it a name, I would guess at it being sort of like a Van Dyke brown color, which I colored in the cone really lightly. I did the same thing with the ice cream scoops. The one closer to the cone is done with a really pale lime green to sort of give it a minty color. And the one on top is done with a really pale, like, it's not even a lemon yellow, it's much lighter and paler than that. But I knew it would add just enough color for the base layer. And then, of course, the chocolate was covered with the burnt sienna, because I figured having a red leaning chocolate or red leaning brown wouldn't be too bad of an idea. Once I got the base layer for all of that laid down and covered, keeping in mind that you don't want to use too much pressure when you're laying down that base layer, because you don't want to abrade or scratch your paper at this point. Scratching your paper when using watercolor pencils does tend to lead to harsher lines, or maybe the color not dispersing, or as well as it could or should. So definitely light pressure when you're doing your first layer of color. And then I took a brush, went in, blended all of that pigment out. As I said earlier, these pencils blend really beautifully. They dissolve in water so easily. It does not take a lot of elbow grease or arm pressure. Thoroughly surprised for them to be so cheap. No name, no number, no light fast information. Yeah, but a surprising product. So after blending all of the color out on my cone, it was time to go in and start to enrich, enhance colors, add in the midtones. And for this, I grabbed a palette, which I have abraded with sandpaper, making it much, much easier for that palette to sort of grab the color from the pencil lead. And it allows me to add water to the pencil scribbled out on the palette in order to make washes that I can then carry over to my actual composition and use that to paint. Now you'll notice that I'm making base washes from the preliminary color that I used as the first layer, and then I'm actually going back into that wet paint with a darker shade of whichever color I used for the base, in order to add in the shadows right away. Now, this is another great example of how using your pencil directly on wet paper can go ahead and give you immediate results. Just keep in mind that if you use a watercolor pencil on wet paper, you more than likely will not be able to blend that color out unless you do it right away. And even if you do it right away, you really won't be blending out much of it. That's one of the advantages of using a dry pencil on wet paper. And you will see that with using that technique, it gave me immediate results as far as the shadows were concerned for the scoops of ice cream. Now, I will go back and forth with this painting and with making sure that the color lay down is correct. Please forgive me. I was having just a bit of issue with my airway there just then. But so yeah, I'm just kind of going back and forth. You'll see me holding the pencils in my hand. I'll scribble some of the pigment out onto the palette, or you may see me use the wet brush to pick paint up, or pick color up, should I say, directly from the lid of that watercolor pencil, which is going to give me that color in much more mass tone, make it stronger. Another thing that I like about watercolor pencils is that, in a sense, they're a lot like alcohol markers when you layer them. Now, hold the phone. Don't get me wrong. Yes, they're a water soluble product. They give you a watercolor effect, a watercolor feel, and they go hand in hand absolutely amazingly with any water soluble products. However, they have a characteristic or share a characteristic with alcohol markers that I think is pretty cool. Just like the transparency of alcohol markers allow you to layer and build saturation in depth with one color, I feel that you can do the same with watercolor pencils. Now, although I did use a different shade of green to add in the shadow for my green ice cream and a different shade of yellow to add in the shadow for my yellow ice cream, I honestly could have used the same pencil because using that pencil on wet paper is going to cause the color to be richer, more saturated, and darker. So if you're working with a limited number of watercolor pencils and you don't have a set, say like I do where I'm using 120, although you can never use 120 at one time, I think on this entire composition I may have used 6 different colors. But I said all that to say that watercolor pencils working like watercolors and having the layer ability of like alcohol markers using one color makes them so versatile. And you can have a few number of pencils and yet pull off many, many, many effects. And I think that's just one of the wonderful things about pencils. Now, when it came to the waffle cone itself, I really kind of made sure that my cone stayed wet. I went in with a rich red brown, maybe put you in the mind of burnt sienna, in order to add in those vivid shadows you would see in a waffle cone. And I really wasn't trying to be too meticulous with it. This cone kind of came out of imagination, wasn't really following a reference photo, so there was no particular place to put the shadowing into the cone. So I just kind of offset it diagonally, did what felt right. And once I get down the actual burnt sienna squares to kind of make it look like shadow, I'm going to go back with more of a burnt umber color and go around the edge of each one of those burnt sienna marks that I put down in order to give it more depth. If I make the edges darker, it's going to draw your attention more to the mid-tone red in the middle as it sits against the really light initial wash that we put down for the background. And this did take a little time, so I always suggest take your time, don't rush through things. When you're watching one of the videos that I produce, 9 times out of 10, they're time lapsed because I don't want to take up a lot of your time trying to show you what I've done. I do know that you guys have kind of requested that I do more real-time videos. So this one is slowed down much more than any of the other ones that have come out in the past, and I am working towards putting more real-time videos on YouTube. But right now, Patreon community members actually have more access to real-time demos, real-time tutorials, and weekly lives. So that's something you may want to consider if you want a little bit more in-depth communication with me about the things that go on in the video, be able to ask direct questions and getting direct answers. And like I said, having real-time demonstrations that may go a little bit more into depth with a painting than I can do on YouTube when I'm doing a time lapse. But like I said, I slowed this one down much more, requiring me to talk much more. So hopefully you're getting, a better feel of this painting because it's not moving as fast. And as I've always told you guys, I will answer any questions. If you have any questions concerning watercolor pencils, their use in standalone or mixed media work, do not hesitate to jump in the comments section, drop me a comment, let me know what's on your mind. I will get back to or answer as quickly as I possibly can. So yeah, don't ever, ever, ever hesitate with that. with that being said, at this point we have moved on to working on the chocolate a little bit more. So I'm taking the really rich brown that I initially started with and scribbling it out on the palette. I'm going to be using that to add another layer of color to the chocolate. And I'm just going to do just like I've done with all the other components of the composition. I'm going to scribble it out on the palette, add water to it in order to make a wash. And when you're making a wash out of your watercolor pencils, it sort of works the same way that you would if you were making a wash out of your watercolor paints. The more water you use, the more diluted the color is going to be. The less water you use, the stronger and more mass tone it's going to be. So keep that in mind as you scribble watercolor pencils out on the palette and turn them into a wash. It's the same philosophy as watercolor paints almost apply. So I did get that chocolate covered in. Now, once I get that based in, I'm going to go back in. I'm going to grab a darker brown now. As I was explaining, the brown that I used for the initial layering, as you can see, is a really reddy brown, leaning more so towards a burnt sienna, an Indian red, a Venetian red, something of that nature. But then I'm actually going to grab a darker pencil, a darker brown pencil, which puts you more in the mind of like a burnt umber, maybe a sepia, something really dark and rich. And I'm going to use that directly on the wet paper, and add some shadow to the edge of that chocolate. You're going to see me use the technique where I use the tip of the brush to grab pigment from the lid of the pencil and again lay down that darker saturated color to just kind of edge off the chocolate, make it look like it's actually lifting from the ice cream. Now I'm going to enhance this little effect in just a few minutes by actually adding shadow under the actual chocolate onto the yellow ice cream itself. And you will see me use that same exact shadow color that I make to do that with predominantly all over the painting, keeping color harmony as I've been doing with the initial 6 colors that I started the painting with. I have not introduced black as of yet, but I will be doing that in a moment. And before I get there, let's talk about that a little bit. Now, a lot of artists do not like using black watercolor or white watercolor. Conversely, using black pencils don't seem to have the same rule unless you're talking about watercolor pencils. Well, I don't follow that rule at all. If you do, of course, nothing against you, and we all have to paint the ways that match us and make us feel joyous. For me, I feel like, hey, I spent the money on a black and white paint. If it's included in the set, it's part of the breakdown of what I paid, and by golly, I'm going to use it. I am going to find one way to use it. I will not throw it away because I am thrifty and I don't want to waste. Even if it requires me making a huge pan from several different brands, I still use it. Now, sparingly, not nearly as much as I do with any other colors, but I definitely use it. And Chinese white, which is normally the white included in most sets, is actually a really good mixing white, meaning that it adds really great body to the paint, almost taking it to giving it a gouache, more opaque effect. So just keep in mind that your Chinese white in your sets can actually be really useful for giving it more body and for giving a color a more pastel feel. And I feel the same about watercolor pencils because, like paints, they can be mixed. You can blend your white pencil with other pencil colors in order to make it more pastel. You can blend your black pencil with other pencil colors to give it a richer shade, which is what I'm doing here in the palette now. I've taken the darkest yellow, almost sun-leaning orangey color. If I had to just give it a name, it would be gamboge. And I'm mixing it with black. I'm mixing it more black than the actual gamboge. Now, if you look at the palette, you'll see that the gamboge is taking up most of the wheel that I'm using. But to the side of that, I'm going to actually scratch that black pigment from the pencil lid, and I'll cover my brush with the black pigment first and then dip it into the gamboge color just a little bit, and that's what I'm using to bring over to my composition and to add that separating shadow in between the yellow ice cream and the chocolate itself. And as I do this, you will actually see that the chocolate seems to lift from the ice cream as if though it's tangible and touchable, which is always the effect that I'm going for whenever we're talking about me painting something that is even semi-realistic. Now, I'm not a 100% realistic artist, but I would like to think that my compositions have both a touch of realism and a touch of whimsy to them. So I try to take it as far as I can to be real without being too, I don't know, uptight about it, I guess. I just like to enjoy painting and creating. I want that love, joy feeling. I want to spread art for the love of spreading art. I want other people to feel just as happy when they create as I do, which is why I, always go out of my way to try to present the best content or ideas that I can come up with you guys. If I run across someone else who has a great idea, crediting them, I always try to share, because if it made me happy, maybe it'll make you happy as well, right? So at this particular point, I think we've kind of covered as much of the ice cream as we're going to. We're just kind of throwing in little hints of shadow here, little hints of shadow there. The pistachio crumbs on the top were done by basically taking the lightest green that I had, which was used for the base layer for the green ice cream. I wet that entire area where the little pistachio pieces would be. Then going back with the dark green that I used in the ice cream, I just made circles in that area, making sure that they connected together and that they rounded off the top of the ice cream on the chocolate. Now, just like with any of the rest of the composition, that green color directly on wet paper created really hard green circular lines that I would not have to worry about moving, which gave me the opportunity to adjust the mid-tone in the pistachios the way I wanted to. And then after that, it was just a matter, as I said, of adding a little dark here, a little dark there. And you'll notice I'm using that same yellowy black shadow color to shade everywhere, regardless of what the initial color was on that particular area of the composition. So yeah, friends, this turned out pretty decently. It's not a masterpiece. I was happy with the direction that it went in, and yeah, it is something that I would definitely share or teach in like a live class, because I feel like it would be easy, it would be really fun, and people would enjoy painting it. So now at this point, we've done covering everything with all of the color friends. It's time to add in those highlights that you guys know I love so much. So what we're gonna do at this point is grab a 000 round brush. I'm dipping that into my bleed proof, which is a wonderful gouache product that will keep color from bleeding through or seeping up through it, like it will with most other gouaches or maybe white paint or white color pencil. And I'm using that to add in the highlights on the pistachio chips or pieces at the top of the cone. I am going around all of the areas that I feel like the light would hit on the chocolate, that I feel like the light would hit on the actual ice cream itself, being sure to add highlights to the top of each of the shadow lines that I added in, simply because I feel like that stark contrast of a really, really light highlight against a dark shadow on top of a mid-tone makes the painting just come alive and pop. I've always enjoyed this particular part of the painting process. There is something about adding those highlights in that, I don't know, it just brings the composition to life. It makes things look so much better. So much better. So that's pretty much going to wrap up the actual painting process that we've gone through today. Hopefully, this closer to a real time demo was a little bit more pleasing for you guys. Do let me know. And here we are, my friends. We have a finished watercolor pencil composition. Hopefully you guys liked this more slowed down than normal paint along. If you picked up on anything, saw anything, heard anything, learned anything, or just enjoyed hanging out, don't forget to sprinkle a little love and give the video a thumbs up. If you are new or returning and you haven't subscribed, please consider hitting that subscription button and notification bell so you'll know when all of the new content comes out. Wednesday is basically water soluble day, and Sunday's release really can be any medium. Water soluble as well. I just kind of play around with Sundays. And of course, you can leave a comment to let me know what you think. As I said earlier, I would really love to know not only what you think of watercolor pencils or what you thought of today's video. You can check the video description for all of the relevant links, the new Defiant Arts website, links to the Etsy shop, links to Patreon, where you can get much more than you do here on YouTube, artist wish list, most recommended product list. So just check the video description and you will get links to everything. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Remember, as I tell you at the end of every single video, just keep creating.